Amen. Thank you, Jada, for doing such a wonderful job singing with your mama this morning. And thank each and every one of you. We are so grateful and thankful for those opportunities to remember just how great God is. Sometimes it can, like Ashley and I were talking about this morning before partner prayer, sometimes life can get really overwhelming and really complex and really frustrating. But it is refreshing and encouraging, and part of the reason why we get together on a weekly basis, not to just learn but to worship, because sometimes it's beneficial for us when we are overwhelmed and when we are not feeling our best, to be able to get together with our brothers and sisters to remember how great God truly is. Sometimes it's getting together and being able to hear someone talk about and exclaim the excellencies of God, and talking about the wonderful things that he has done for them, that helps us to remember that he can do the same things for us. Sometimes it's watching someone else go through what you've been through, that gives us the opportunity to reflect and to remember and to thank God for what he has already brought us out of, and then encourage the one who is still going through to know that the same God that brought us out is able to do the same for them. So there are lots of benefits to getting together and being together for worship. There is the encouragement that comes from looking at your life and knowing the things that God has done in your life, and knowing that he is still working, that he is still in control, that no matter how big the situation or circumstance may seem, that God is bigger than that, and that he still has purpose for each and every one of our lives. And so thank you all, not just for your presence in worship, but for your participation in worship, because it is all ministry to each of us. And so we are grateful and thankful, and we are excited about what the Lord is doing in JoJo's life at this moment as he continues to cry out to the Lord. So we are going to continue our journey through Nehemiah. Of course, we've taken a break for the last couple of weeks as Professor Q guided us in an excellent way through the intersection of faith and politics. And so hopefully we were all able to be informed voters on this Tuesday. But as we gather back together, interestingly enough, as I was kind of organizing my thoughts and thinking about the rest of the year, today will be our last stop in Nehemiah until New Year's Eve. And then on New Year's Eve, we'll get back together and we'll pick up in Nehemiah where we leave off today. And so just as a reminder for forward planning purposes, of course, we will be gathering for worship on New Year's Eve to end 2018 on a high note, and begin 2019 in prayer with our church family. So go ahead and lock that in on your calendars, and we'll have more information about that as it comes. So Nehemiah chapter 2, and today we're going to be looking at verses 11 through 16. And I want to remind everyone, of course, the lesson today and what you're going to do differently this week based on what you heard. And so, of course, as we are going through this year, closing out this year, our focus for closing out this year is master your space. And so we're going to continue that as we talk today, and we'll also talk just briefly about what our focus is, our ministry focus is going to be as we transition into 2019. So Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 11 through 16 from the English Standard Version. These are the words that it says. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. There we go. Oh, clicker got stuck. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. Verse 16, and the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. So today, as we, again, as I mentioned, as we kind of touch on Nehemiah one last time before picking it back up on New Year's Eve, today we want to talk about not so fast. Not so fast. So does anybody know what's happening in this picture right here? Yep, turned away from where, though? Nope. Nope. The DMV. So before we get into all that, let's just kind of recap and catch up to make sure we're all on the same page about where we are right now. So we've been talking about how we ended up connecting with Nehemiah in his particular book here in the Bible. We've talked about the history of Israel and how when the Lord led them out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses through the wilderness and into the Promised Land, and then allowed them to recapture the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua. And then as they were there and they got settled there for a little while, the Lord had given them judges to rule over the people, but because God wanted to be their king. But the people wanted a physical king just like everybody else, and so they kept begging God for a man, and the Lord was like, all right, whatever, because sometimes when we pray for things that we don't need, he gives it to us just so we can understand that he knows our needs better than we do. And so he gives them a king, a man named, y'all remember the first king of Israel? His name was Saul, and Saul was not a great king. Is able to look at him and tell that something is wrong on the inside, and so he ends up asking him what's wrong. And Nehemiah, because he's been praying and been fasting, and because he's been seeking the Lord about what he could do to help alleviate the challenges of his people, Nehemiah is ready to present the king with a plan when the king opens the door. And because of his favor with the king by being the king's cupbearer, the king allows Nehemiah, thanks to the favor of God, to do what his heart's desire is, which is to return to Jerusalem and build the wall. And so we talked last time we were in Nehemiah about how when the king sent Nehemiah, he sent him with his word, he sent him with his warriors, but it was Nehemiah's responsibility to stay woke. And so the king sent letters with him, giving him authority to pass through all of the lands that he would pass through. He and he was giving him letters as well to give him authorization to utilize the king's wood from his forest. And then he sent with him some soldiers and some officials from his army to go with him so that they could protect the desires of the king. But it was Nehemiah's responsibility to stay woke, because even as soon as they heard about it, there were individuals there who did not like the fact that he was coming back to do something that was going to benefit his people. And so the encouragement was that as we look around at our communities, as we find out about the reality of the condition of our people, that there ought to be something that moves us and motivates us emotionally in some way, shape, or form. When we look at the conditions of our people, we ought to be either moved to tears or moved to fight. But something ought to stir up on the inside of us to want to do something to bring about resolution to the challenges that our community is experiencing. And then when we are aware of the challenges, we ought to be praying and fasting and seeking the Lord for understanding about what we can do to help bring about resolution to the things that are broken in our community. And as the Lord makes that clear to us, then we've got to be intentional about using the time to put together a plan so that when the opportunity is afforded to us to be able to go and do something about it, we don't have to think about what we want to do, but we can go ahead and communicate it to the individual that has been positioned in power to be able to give us the authority and the resources to go and do what God has laid on our hearts to do. And understanding, of course, that as God sends us to go do his work, that he sends us with his word that will encourage us and remind us of his promises for victory if we stay in alignment with his will, as well as his warriors, his angels that will fight the spiritual battles for us. But we just have to stay woke and remember that there will be people that will be seeking to fight us all along the way. And so as we prepare to transition with the end of 2018 into 2019, we are not just transitioning as transitioning years and transitioning calendars, but we are also in a period and a position of transition as a church. And that's not just as a church as a whole, but as a church as individuals. Each of us in some way, shape, or form is at a stage of transition and transformation as the Lord continues to do the work on the inside of us, preparing to make that work begin to manifest outside of us. And so it's important for us that as we focus on preparing to do the work, that we pause and we slow down a little bit to make sure that we don't get ahead of ourselves. And so today's sermon and the focus of today's message is just to remind you in the speed and the excitement and the enthusiasm of what God is doing, both in you and in this church as well, that we can't get ahead of ourselves. So before we get too far down the road, we want to slow down and realize not too fast. We want to slow down. We want to take our time. Okay. Now, the reason that we want to do this is because one of my favorite shows when I was growing up was a TV show called Martin. How many of y'all used to watch Martin? Martin I look at Martin Lawrence a lot like I look at Eddie Murphy. They have timeless comedy. Things that they made 20 years ago, you can watch today and it's still hilarious. Unlike Kevin Hart, who you watch his stuff 2 weeks later, it's like, okay, that joke is old now. No, I'm just kidding. Kevin Hart's all right. Anyway, let me stop talking about people in the sermon. But Martin is hilarious, and one of my favorite episodes of Martin was when Martin had to go to the DMV. Y'all remember when Martin went to the DMV? So Martin had to go to the DMV because his license had expired, and he gets there, and y'all remember who was working at the counter? Sherman Hemsley. Sherman Hemsley was his DMV attendant, and Martin kept having to go through this process of going up to the counter and getting paperwork and then going to the end of the line and then getting something done and then coming back up to the top of the line. And so at one point he got into a fight with Miss Jerry because Miss Jerry tried to bump him out the line. Y'all remember Miss Jerry? Miss Jerry's the old lady that he was always fighting with, and Miss Jerry ended up whipping up on him, and then she ended up whipping Tommy out of the DMV. But in the process, you see those papers down there on the floor. That was Martin's test, his driver's test that he had just completed, that he was trying to go ahead and give to Sherman Hemsley so that he could go ahead and get his new license and be out the door. Well, unfortunately, before this fight happened, Martin had bumped into a gentleman who he would end up finding out had stolen his wallet, because when he got to the counter to turn his test in to Sherman Hemsley, all the paperwork was there. The only thing he needed was his expired license, and they were going to be able to get him his new license. So Martin starts patting himself down. He realizes that he doesn't have what he needs to be able to complete what he came there to do, and Sherman Hemsley lets him know that that test that he completed was for people who have an expired license. If you don't have a license, you got to fill out a whole different set of paperwork. And so Martin ended up having to go, you can't really see the sign right there, but the sign right there says from scratch. So Martin had to go all the way back and start from scratch, all the way at the end of the line. And everybody was back at the end of the line waving at him and welcoming him back because they had experienced the same thing. And I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, maybe at the DMV, maybe in the financial aid line, maybe somewhere else where you had to wait in line for a long time. You get up to the front to where you're finally able to take care of your business, and then they let you know that, that you done forgot something, that they're not going to be able to help you to complete what you came there to do because you don't have everything that you need to be able to meet your goal and your objective for that time. And this is important for us where we are right now, because as the Lord is preparing to transition us, and we have some exciting news to share with you at the end of service today, but as the Lord is preparing to transition us and increase our capacity, and as the Lord is giving us new opportunities, and as he is even revealing more and more of your vision to you, sometimes we can get ahead of ourselves and jump in line before we're really prepared to be able to complete what it is we're there to do. And so it's important for us in this process to make sure that instead of getting to the front of the line and then having to go back to scratch, let's just slow down a little bit and take some time to make sure that we have everything that we need to be able to do what the Lord is calling us to do. It's what Jesus talks about in Luke chapter 14, verses 28 through 30, where he says these words: suppose one of you wants to build a tower won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. And this is what I hope that we are able to avoid, both as a church and as individuals, is getting ahead of ourselves and into things that we're not really prepared for. And it's tough because there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm that comes with knowing what the Lord is calling you to do. But we have to be careful and intentional that when we do it, when we start the actual work, that the work is able to be finished, because it is the finished work that brings glory to God. So we don't want to get all the way to the front only to realize that we don't have everything that we need. And so today is a not so fast conversation. And thankfully, we are able to learn from Nehemiah's example of how to go about being prepared the right way. Now, our ministry focus for the next year is going to be on building builders. Of course, we had talked a couple of weeks ago about the fact that we were originally looking at purchasing some land, and then it became abundantly clear that the Lord's desire for us was not to focus on building a building, but rather to focus on building builders. That his desire for our resources and our time and our energy and effort was not to focus on building a building, but rather to focus on building builders, building people who build the community, building people who are building their visions, building people who will build their dreams, building people who will build up other people to be builders who build up other people. That is what God is calling Church on Purpose to do. But the reason that we are mastering our space right now is because before we can build anything, the proper preparation work has to be done. We don't want to start trying to build something, build people, and the foundation not even be sure. We don't want to start building and that what we have built has been built on sand and is not going to be able to withstand the wind and the waves and the rain that is going to come against it as it grows. And so as we look at our scripture today here in Nehemiah, we can learn some very practical lessons about how to be properly prepared to do the work so that when the work begins, the work will be work that lasts. And the first insight that Nehemiah gives us is that there is a stealth of purpose. There's a stealthiness to our purpose. Verses 11 and 12 say these words. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. Now, what's interesting about this is that Nehemiah has come back to Jerusalem with an escort from the king. He's come back to Jerusalem with an escort from the king. Now, in a city like this, when you show up escorted by the king's guard, people are automatically going to know something is going on. And so Nehemiah, in his wisdom, understands that if the work is going to be done the way that it needs to be done, everybody can't be all up in his business while he's trying to prepare to do the work. And so there are certain elements of what he does that need to be done stealthily so that the people that need to know, and the people who don't need to know don't know what's going on. Now, people know that he's in the city. And so rather than going around and making his inspection of the wall in the middle of the day, which would open the door for people to come up and start asking, what are you doing? Oh, you getting ready to rebuild the wall, huh? How you going to do that? And so he decides, rather than going out in the middle of the day, to go out at nighttime with as few people as possible. Matter of fact, he doesn't even take any other animals besides the one that he's riding on. And there's a portion that we'll talk about when we get to in a second where even the space that he's in, the animal can't even go. And so he travels lightly so that he can travel stealthily, so that he can do the research and the reconnaissance that he needs to do to be able to properly assess what God is calling him to fix. See, part of the problem for some of us is, one, God is calling us to fix problems that we don't even fully understand. And so when we get into it, because we haven't properly researched it, we get overwhelmed real quick, and then we're taken out of the game because we didn't realize that we had bitten off more than we could chew. So Nehemiah, in his wisdom, is intentional about doing the work to understand the problem that God is calling him to solve. And he begins that by operating as a kingdom ninja. Out of sight, out of everybody's mind, so that he can have the time to be able to process what it is he's doing. So he minimizes, if not eliminates, raising unnecessary suspicions before his plan is even solid. And this is important because at this particular stage, he only has a goal. He doesn't have any plans. Because you can't formulate plans to solve a problem that you don't fully understand. And this was important for us when we were relocating to Omaha, Nebraska. One thing that the Lord impressed upon my heart very heavy was don't go out there popping up out of nowhere, nobody know you, acting like you have all of the solutions to all of the problems that they've been dealing with for all these years. And so when we moved out here, it was actually a full year. We were here a full year before we ever started having services. And during that year, the Lord impressed it upon me to be intentional about learning about the community and finding out where I could serve. And so when a meeting popped up, I tried to be there. When a conversation was being had, I tried to be there. When opportunities for service arose, I tried to be there, engaged and serving, because it would have been dumb for us. It would have been foolish for us to believe that we could relocate to a community that we know nothing about and solve every single problem that they'd already had. And so the Lord challenges us when he calls us to participate in the resolution of problems and issues, to not just jump in and arrogantly believe that we already know everything that needs to be known about fixing the problem, but to be intentional about learning first what the history of the problem is, so that then you can see the areas that people have succeeded as well as the areas that people have failed, and then match that up with what God has given you to do and be able to do it efficiently and effectively. So the Lord has called us as a church to be one that learns and serves, which is why Church on Purpose, for the most part, is present in our community without prominence. We are present in the community without prominence. We are present in the community without prominence, which means every time we go somewhere, we don't walk in and say, Church on Purpose is here. Well, Karen kind of did that yesterday, but but I appreciate the enthusiasm, but that was because you are excited about your church and about having the opportunity to engage in the community. That's different from saying Church on Purpose is here, all your problems are solved. Yeah. And so the Lord gives us the opportunity to be present and engaged and involved in what's going on in our community. But our name doesn't have to be on everything that we do. Everybody doesn't have to know about everything that we are trying to do, and every way that we're trying to engage, and every person that we're trying to serve, and every time that we help somebody. Everybody doesn't need to know. You know why? Because the people that are being touched and impacted are the people that know. And if it makes a big enough difference in their lives, then they'll go tell other people about it. The truth of the matter is, we are all together, 25, 27 people sitting in somebody's living room, but the reputation that we have been able to build as a church precedes us. That I get every single week, I get people coming to me and saying, "Oh yeah, the coach at Church on Purpose. Heard some good stuff about y'all, what y'all doing over there." And I'm like, all right, well, you should come to church. Like, I don't know about the whole living room thing. I totally understand, whatever. But what is beautiful about it is that has nothing to do with what's being done within these walls. The only way that our church could build that kind of reputation is because of how you are living your lives in the community, because of what they see you all doing, and because of how they see you all growing. And that, if we can maintain that as the identity and the testimony of Church on Purpose in our community, then we do two things. One, we show people that faith doesn't have to be that difficult. It doesn't require that you spend 37 hours at church every single week. But we also show people That we can make a practical difference in our community by simply learning how to maximize the potential that exists within us and continuing to love people. And that is amazing. But we can't do that if we come into every single situation acting like we already have all the answers. So there's a stealthiness to what we do. There's a reason why we don't market, why we don't have billboards, and why we don't send out mailers, and why we don't have door hangers, and why we don't have commercials. Because the work that the Lord has called us to do, he has called us to begin stealthily. There's a stealthiness of purpose that is guiding us, that is allowing us to really get a good grasp upon the unique contribution that Church on Purpose can make to this community that nobody else can do. And thankfully, the Lord is clarifying that for us. And the beauty of him clarifying that for us is that as we continue to gather all of this information that we need so that we can do what it is we've been called to do, we will be able to do that with the right people. See, because we are very clear about who we are and what we do, we understand we not only don't need everybody, but also that Church on Purpose ain't for everybody. And that is totally okay, because the beauty of the body is that, someone's mission and vision may not align with what Church on Purpose is trying to do, but that does not mean that there isn't a church somewhere in Omaha that they can connect with and align with and be able to fulfill their purpose through. We're just very clear about what we're here to do. And we're looking for the people that are clear that this is what they want to support and what they want to do as well. And those people we can rock with. We can go out in the middle of the night and we can do the reconnaissance work with the few people that we have so that we can gather the understanding and the knowledge to be able to make a difference here in our community. And you all have been instrumental to equipping us with the insight and the understanding to be able to properly serve Omaha, Nebraska. That's why I'm grateful for you. Because you can't go riding out in the middle of the night when you're trying to be quiet with just anybody. Because there's some people that just can't stop talking. And they start spilling all the beans ahead of time. You can't trust them. There are other people that are working for the enemy that just want to know where you are so they can go back and report where you are and what you're doing. But I'm grateful that we have been able to build the degree of trust and love for one another that we have here at Church on Purpose, where we are unified around an agreed upon mission and vision. And I am excited about then what the Lord is able to do as he transitions us to the second stage of this process, which is the strategy of purpose. In verse 13, this is what it says. It says, I went out by night by the valley gate of the dragon spring into the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate into the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered the valley gate and so returned. So here's Nehemiah. He gets up in the middle of the night. He gets a couple of his homies. He gets on his animal that he's riding, and they leave out the valley gate, and then they work their way around the wall, inspecting the wall, looking at the wall and looking at where it's been broken down and looking at where the gates have been broken off and burned up. And so he bounces around different parts of the outside of the city. And then because it's so broken down and so beat down, he ends up coming back in through the same door that he left. Now, the beauty of this is he's able to get out there and he's able to do his research and his reconnaissance and then come back, and people have no idea what he's doing, where he's been, or what he did when he left the city, because he comes back in the same door. So they have no idea whether or not he went around the city or any of that stuff. So it minimizes, again, the questions that people could have where they could start trying to understand his plan and begin to try to thwart what it is he's trying to do. The beauty of this is that the inspection mission to assess what needs to be done is exactly what he needs to do there in the middle of the night before beginning the work. And for us, we have to appreciate the fact that if we are going to be intentional about seeing progress in the areas that God is calling us to make a difference in, it's going to come with an intentional strategy. And that strategy is an outgrowth of the awareness of our research and our reconnaissance. See, whatever the Lord is calling you to do, the call is just the first stage. After you get the call and you understand what he's asking you to do, Then you got to try to understand what it is he's asking you to do. You got to get in and start figuring out where the real problems exist, because the strategy for your purpose is going to be an outgrowth of your understanding of the problem. See, for Church on Purpose, when the Lord initially made the call to plant a church, the initial call was just to plant the church. And it was like, after, some back and forth, it was like, okay, we'll plant the church. But then it was, well, why do we need another church? And that is when then the process of gathering the information and looking at the problems that exist and trying to see all of the areas where the walls are broken down in our community helped me to understand and identify and clarify the unique contribution that Church on Purpose can make. And that's why, as a church, it is our mission to develop disciples of Jesus Christ who understand their faith and live it, who understand their purpose and pursue it, and who understand their vision and build it. That is the unique mission of Church on Purpose, because when the Lord called to plant, the reconnaissance process revealed that both individually and organizationally, the church is severely lacking in clarity of purpose. And so we just keep doing a lot of stuff, because either that's what we've always done, or because we just don't want to do nothing different. And we do things and we don't understand why we do things. And so the things that we do don't have meaning and they don't have value and they're not transformative for us. And then we can't understand why they're not transformative for anybody else. And so the Lord's call was to purpose. And then the strategy becomes an outgrowth of what it is God is calling us to do. Nehemiah had to get in and he had to do the assessment of the walls, because it was that assessment, it was that understanding that heavily influenced his strategy, because it was seeing where the walls were broken down and how bad the gates really were off, that influenced the resources he was going to need, both the material resources and the human resources that he was going to need to be able to accomplish the work. It would have been foolish for Nehemiah to go back to Jerusalem, to get out, because then everybody that sees it is going to laugh at you, saying, this person started building, able to finish. We want to develop a culture of finishing at Church on Purpose. We want to develop a reputation for not just being starters, but being finishers. And if we're going to be finishers, we have to do the work on the front end to make sure that the strategy is equipping us and setting us up for success down the road. And so even though we're excited, even though we're enthusiastic, even though the Lord is doing some great things and we're excited about the momentum and we're excited about growth and all of these things, we got to slow down and not move so fast that we get ahead of ourselves and then find ourselves ill-equipped to be able to handle the work that God is calling us to do, which is why the beginning of the year, we're going to be walking through our discipleship process here at the church. And I'm going to be walking you through every single stage so that everybody understands what the path to purpose is, how it relates to your journey of purpose, and then how the Lord is going to use that to help us to create a culture of building builders. So I'm excited about that, and I hope you are too. What's beautiful about this moment, as Nehemiah is out here intentionally researching in the middle of the night, is that it allows him to identify and organize so that he can efficiently and effectively be able to solve the problem. He's able then to present a clear and a solid vision to those that he's going to be speaking with and asking for help, so that they understand what's going to be required of them and even why it matters that they participate. See, if you're not clear about not only what the Lord is calling you to do, but what needs to be done in order for you to meet your objectives, you're not going to be able to accurately communicate that to the people whose help you're going to need to accomplish the goal. And whatever the Lord is calling you to do, you're not going to be able to do by yourself. So you're going to need the help. You're going to need the assistance. You're going to need the benefit of other people. And so researching, engaging in that reconnaissance and understanding the problems that exist and what it's going to take to be able to solve them equips you to then be able to effectively and clearly communicate that to other people, but be careful about communicating it too early, which is why the last part of this that we see is that associated with Nehemiah's journey, there's the secrecy of purpose. When you find out what the Lord is calling you to do, you can't just start running around telling everybody immediately. In Genesis, we read the story of Joseph. And the Lord revealed to Joseph, never be as committed to your vision as you are, because they're never going to be able to see your vision the way that you see it. And that's why when we get into the new year, we're going to look at how intentional and how purposeful Nehemiah was in not, sharing the entire vision, but making sure that he was very intentional about shrinking the mission for everybody that was the partner. Everybody didn't participate in building the whole wall, but everybody participated in building the wall. People had their own sections that they had to build, but everybody wasn't responsible for making sure that the whole wall got built. And when you think about your vision and the scope of what God is calling you to do and bring to our community, you are the only one that sees the entire picture. And you have to figure out who needs to know what to be able to do what they need to do to help you to fulfill what God is calling you to do. How do you give people opportunities to support you in the work that you're doing without burdening them with information that they just don't need to know? See, because the reality is, for you to share your vision with me, something about my vision has to align with your vision for me to be able to support you. But I cannot lay down my vision to just support your vision. But what I do as a part of your vision has to be a support to my vision. That sounds really complicated. Did that make sense? Prime example. So the Lord moved us here to plant church on purpose, to be about the business of developing disciples of Jesus Christ who understand their faith and live it, understand their purpose and pursue it, and understand their vision and build it. That's what God sent us here to do. For whatever reason, I decided to go back to work in June. And in going back to work, what was paramount for me was that whoever I was working with, our visions had to be in alignment for the community. I couldn't just go back to work for anybody doing just anything, because I'm clear about what the Lord has placed me here to do. So I had to be intentional about aligning myself with someone who has a who we can at least agree upon walking down the road for a little while together. Now, where we end up is where we end up. But at this particular stage, I know that by virtue of me working in my purpose, I am supporting you in the realization of your vision as well. And so I am able to work at my work with purpose and with intention, because the work that I do on my job is a part of my purpose. But it is a matter of finding the balance between working too hard on somebody else's vision and not enough on my own. And so I have to be intentional about drawing the line with my energy and my effort and with my time and my investment, so that I don't wake up 20 years from now having built somebody else's vision and come back and look at mine, and all I have still is the foundation. And so for us as a church, one of the hardest things for us to be able to do is to, one, be clear about our visions, and two, be clear about how we are able to support one another in working out our visions. And that is going to come with developing discernment and growing wisdom that helps us to only share what needs to be shared, but to operate in secrecy outside of that. See, some of your family members, they don't need to know what the Lord has placed on your heart to do. And I had this conversation with a couple of you during our evaluations, because they've known you your whole life. And because of that, they've already put you in a box of what you can and cannot do. The beauty of God is that he blows the box away. And with God, you can do more than you ever thought you could do. And so they might not need to find out about what you're doing until you send them to save the date for the ribbon cutting ceremony. But other people that believe in you, that share a common vision, that are going in the same direction, you might need to pull them on board right now so that they can help you to work through and organize your thoughts. But be careful about sharing your vision and your dreams with other people. Because just like we talked about earlier, before Nehemiah ever began the work with Sanballat and Tobiah, individuals who were mad, period, at the fact that somebody was coming to do something that was going to benefit the community. And somebody is not going to like what it is you want to do. And you got to make sure that they are not a part of the conversation when you are trying to understand the plan enough for you to have the faith to jump out there and actually do it. Yes, ma'am. You good. This church on purpose. Excellent question. How do you identify the people that you talk to? How do you discern the people who you should be sharing with and who you should not? Whether you actually said the answer in your question. It's discernment. You know, that is where we depend on our relationship with the Holy Spirit to guide us, not just in revelation of the vision and not just in clarity of purpose, but in clarity of partnership as well. And there is an amazing thing that happens when you are clear about your purpose. It actually becomes easier to, one, see people who have purpose too. When you are focused on your purpose, it becomes easier to see people that are focused on purpose as well. Which is why in a perfect world, we would all know our purpose before we get married. That would solve a lot of problems. But then two, what that also allows us to do is it allows us to identify the people that we can work with that understand the value of protecting purpose. And so you pray and you seek the discernment that the Holy Spirit gives you, and you would be amazed at how random conversations that you have end up opening the door for you to be able to talk about what it is you're going to do. Yes, sir. What's really interesting about that is when you look at Luke 14 and that particular passage of scripture where Jesus is talking about the cost of discipleship, he says these words in the entirety of it. It's verses 25 through 33. He says, "Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple." The reason that I read that is because we have to, as kingdom citizens, we have to understand that when we enter into citizenship in the kingdom, our family changes. Now, our blood is still our blood and will forever be our blood. But we become a part of a new family with new responsibility and new obligations when we enter into the kingdom. And the reason that I say that is because don't you find it interesting that that when Jesus calls 12 men to walk with him to be a part of his intimate inner circle, none of them were his brothers. And Scripture even talks about the moment Jesus realizes that he's not going to be able to do any miracles in Nazareth because nobody has faith in him, because when they look at him, they don't see the Son of God, they see the son of Joseph the carpenter. But see, if we look at things, if we look at the manifestation, the attainment, and the fulfillment of our vision through natural lenses, then we will wonder why the people that have always been with us won't go forward with us. But the reality is your purpose is bigger than any existing relationship that you have. And what Jesus says is not that you're supposed to hate your brother and you're supposed to hate your sister and your mother and your father and your friends and everybody. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that you should be so in love with God and so in love with God's purpose and mission and vision for your life that if he asks you to do it without them, you shouldn't be so attached to them that you can't then go do what he's asking you to do. That we should never be so in love with and so attached to anything that if God asks us to let it go for his will, we can't let go of it. That's what it's saying. That if God calls you to go do what you're supposed to do and your mama says no, what you gonna do? Has nothing to do with your age. And Scripture confirms that because when Jesus was 12 years old, his mom was like, let's go. And Jesus chilling in the temple. They had to come back and get him. And now, of course, he ended up submitting and being obedient. But he let her know that he had to be about his father's business. And that altered the relationship dynamic that they had. And she understood and had the confidence that what he was doing because he was led by God to do it. And that's the caveat to that. You know, even as you are young, the Lord still speaks and works. And as parents, we have to be sensitive to that and give our children the freedom to be able to explore how the Lord is leading them. But at the end of the day, there should be nothing that we would rather hold on to than the will and the purpose of God for our lives. We ought to be willing to drop it so fast that it looks like we hated it to begin with. Jesus' conversation with the rich young ruler, and then we'll be done. Jesus' conversation with the rich young ruler was, you want to come follow me? Go sell everything that you have and give it to the poor. Now, did Jesus really expect him to do that? Could have been a possibility. I mean, everybody that was following Jesus a couple of months later in Acts 2 was doing what? Selling all their possessions and giving it to the poor. So Jesus very well could have been asking him to do that. But what I think Jesus was trying to do was to help that young man understand that he had limitations on how much he was going to follow. That he loved his stuff more than he loved being a disciple of Jesus. That he loved his present condition more than he loved the assurance of his future condition. That he loved what he had more than what he didn't even know Jesus had for him. And in the pursuit of our purpose, and that's why it's important for us, y'all, to slow down sometimes. Because we can get really excited and we can start running, but if we don't count the cost of what the race has entailed, then we get into the race and then we get discouraged. You ever see somebody who had such clear and amazing purpose and vision, and they get into it, and it gets tough, and then they give up, and you like, no, because what you had was so great, and it would have made such a difference if you had just not given up. Let's not be those people. I know we're excited about building, and we're excited about working in our purpose and growing, and we're excited about the things that God is going to do through us as we work through our purpose, but not so fast. It's okay to slow down periodically and to make sure that we are prepared properly to be able to finish the work that the Lord is starting. So as we go through the rest of this year, you've got about 7 weeks left. 7 weeks left in 2018. 7 weeks left. Utilize this 7 weeks to clarify your understanding of your purpose. What is the problem that the Lord has you here to solve? Get real clear about that, to where when somebody asks you, somebody named Coach J asks you what you're here to do, you can say, I'm here to bring a sense of purpose back to individuals and organizations. Because when you are clear about that, then you know where to begin investing your energy and your resources in research and reconnaissance. You know what problems to start looking at, and you know how to look at it, what to assess, so that you can figure out what's going to be required of you to get this done. Nehemiah, because he was clear that he was supposed to build the walls, didn't waste time looking at the landscaping. Be clear about what it is the Lord is calling you to do. And use these last 7 weeks. I'm not huge on numerology, but what is 7? Perfection, completion. 7 weeks to complete clarity about what problem you're here to solve. To do the research, to figure out exactly what the problem is, why the problem exists, what other methods and modes have been taken to try to bring about resolution to the problem, and what stuff worked and what stuff didn't. What kind of resources are you going to need to be able to bring about resolution to the problem? Some of y'all need money. Some of y'all not going to need money. You're just going to need people. You're going to need hands once a month to be able to start working in your area of purpose. Some of you are going to need financial support to help get things off the ground. Some of you are going to need access. It's all right. Some of you are going to need access to experts that are working in that area. And guess what? Between all of us in this room, we know everybody in Omaha, Nebraska. Or we at least know somebody who know everybody in Omaha, Nebraska. So we can get you connected to the people that you need, but you can't get connected to them if you don't know you need them. So let's be excited about building builders in 2019, but before we start building anything, not so fast, let's properly prepare to do this thing. This, my friends, is why the Lord has us mastering our space right now, so that as a church, we can be operating at optimal efficiency to make sure that all of us are able to focus on what we need to focus on our unique contribution to this church. The Lord has great things ahead of us, but we can't jump straight to the building part. Because the building, any building that's not planned for, is a building that is destined to crumble. And I refuse to, as your coach, allow you to build something that is not going to last. I refuse to, together, build something that is not going to last. So how can you prepare today for the change that you want to make tomorrow? So that when the time comes, you don't have to go to the end of the line because you didn't have what you needed. So, as we prepare for our period of reflection today, let's be intentional about identifying our takeaway and figuring out what we're going to do differently this week based on what we heard. For those of you that are joining us online, have a great week. Live each day on purpose. As we come to the conclusion of today's lesson, our hope is that it's been both informative and impactful for you. In addition to coming back and viewing this recording again to increase retention, we also want to encourage you to take an opportunity to reflect.
That's right. Here at Church on Purpose, it's part of our mission to help people understand their faith and live it. And one of the ways we do that is by taking time to reflect after each lesson. You can join us now in a period of reflection by simply clicking on the reflection button below your viewer, where it'll take you to a place where you can fill out some information and answer the same questions that we're going to be answering here in the room. Number one, what stuck out to you most from today's lesson? And number two, what do you plan to do differently this week based on what you heard?
Now, if you're watching from somewhere outside of the Omaha metro area, you can stay connected to happening in Church on Purpose by liking us on Facebook at facebook.com/churchonpurpose, or by visiting our website www.churchonpurpose.org, where you'll find additional information about the ministry, an archive of past sermons and Bible studies, as well as opportunities to contribute and connect.
If you are in the Omaha metro area, we'd like to extend a personal invitation for you to come and join us on location for either our Sunday Worship and Word at 9:25 a.m. or midweek Worship and Word on Wednesday nights at 6:25 p.m.
We look forward to you. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, live each day on purpose.